then creating objects for classes, then injecting the dependencies, then initializing the objects and destroying the, this is going to become what, some additional button. So that additional button is now is separated, nothing but what, this additional button is now shifted to another person, and the other person is like container. So this container is going to create objects, initialize objects on behalf of you. So that is nothing but what, your application responsibilities are shifted, transferred, nothing but inverted. That is what the meaning of inversion of control. Uh, that that is called container. So some responsibilities of application are now transferred to some other person. Now these responsibilities are shared or are divided and transferred to some other person. That other person is what called container. That other person only we are calling it as container. And that is called inversion of control container. In short, we are simply calling as IOC container. Stands for inversion of control container. Okay. Now let's move on. We'll start with. Okay, let's start with. Okay, we'll move on. Now next, I just want to tell you something like this. This is what actually I told in the session, in the previous session. These responsibilities of your application are transferred to container. Now today what we are discussing, this, right? Now we'll move on. This inversion of control, IOC, is a pattern which can be implemented in two ways. This inversion of control can be implemented in two ways now, right? That one we are calling as a dependency lookup, and other one is called dependency injection. So these are the two ways of implementing IOC. There are two ways of implementing IOC. One is called dependency injection, and the other one is called dependency lookup. Right? This is dependency lookup. This is called dependency injection. Right? We have dependency lookup and dependency injection. Okay, right? Now we'll tell you what this dependency lookup and what this dependency injection. Sometimes this dependency lookup is also called as dependency dependency pull, and sometimes we call dependency injection as dependency push. Right? One is called dependency lookup and other one is called dependency injection, which is also called dependency pull and dependency push. Okay, let's move on. Right. Let's discuss about what is what. Actually, these are the two ways of implementing IOC. When come to Spring, I'll tell you the difference. In Spring, this inversion of control pattern is implemented through dependency injection. So a small difference in between dependency lookup and dependency injection is, in both ways of implementation, in both ways of implementing this IOC pattern, there is a container who is going to take care of creating objects, initializing objects, and destroying objects. But in dependency lookup, uh, suppose if there is an object, it has to search for, or it has to look for its required dependencies in the container. Means what? The container is not automatically injecting the dependencies. The container is not automatically injecting the dependencies, right? What is happening now? It is just going to search for, or is going to look for its required dependencies within the container. So there is something which I want to explain you here, and I'll tell you what is happening. Observe clearly. Okay. For example, this is container. Assume that. So this is an object here. In container, it is an object. And suppose this object requires, this object has a dependency. I mean to say that what uh, this is the dependent object, is a dependency, it's dependency object. So both are in container. Now this first object, which I can call it as what, a dependent object, right? Is going to look for its dependency object in the container. But this container is not, right? This container is not going to directly automatically inject now this dependency object to the dependent object. Now say for example, this is going to be the dependent object. Right, this is going to be the dependent object. And say for example, this is going to be the dependency object. Dependency object. Now here we have a dependent object, and here we have a dependency object. Now this is going to be the container. Right. Now this is a dependent object, this is a dependency object. The container doesn't inject the dependency object automatically to the dependent object. Now this dependent object is going to look for its required dependency object in the container. That's called dependency lookup and injection difference. So the objects, both objects are created by container, they are initialized by the container, and even they are going to be destroyed by the container also. But only when it comes to the dependency injection, a dependent object has to look for its dependency object in the container. Means what, it has to explicitly get the dependency object. But in dependency injection, automatically the container injects this dependency object to the dependent object. It will automatically, right? It automatically injects now this dependency object to the dependent object. So that's the difference. Now this container injects this dependent object, this dependency object to its dependent object. Automatically injects. That is called dependency injection. But in lookup, the container doesn't inject like this automatically. The objects are created by container. Okay, objects are created by container, they are initialized by container, they are going to be destroyed by container. But now a dependent object has to look for its dependency object in the container. It has to look up. It has to look up for its dependency. In the container, it has to look up for its dependency, then it has to get. It has to get the dependency object. Right? Of course, that related code exists in dependent object. The dependent object should contain the code for that. To look for the dependency object in the container and to read or get the dependency object, this dependent object should contain some code. But the container automatically doesn't inject the dependency object to the dependent object. Now this is what called as a dependency lookup. But dependency injection means without this dependent object doesn't have any code explicitly. The container only will inject. The container only injects the dependency object to the dependent object. Now this dependent object should not contain any, this object doesn't have any code for looking for the dependency object and get it. Now this is what called a dependency injection. Right, let's move on. We'll start with that. Right. Everybody try to understand now. Okay, listen clearly and carefully. Now, but coming to Spring now, this inversion of control in Spring I am talking about. In Spring framework, IOC pattern is implemented through what? Dependency injection, not with a dependency lookup. So that's the reason why in Spring we also call the Spring IOC container as a DI container. DI means dependency injection. So simply inversion of control is a pattern which can be implemented in two ways. One is dependency lookup and other one is dependency injection. And in Spring, it is implemented through dependency injection. So in Spring, we are calling the Spring IOC container as a dependency injection container. Right? It is called dependency injection container. That's good. Now, when it comes to being dependencies now, in Spring, as part of the application development, whatever the classes you are creating, they are all called Spring Bean classes. So simply Spring Beans are nothing but the classes whose life cycle is managed by or whose objects are managed by Spring container. They are called Spring Beans. Okay. As I said already, there is no particularly some other rules or something to be required for making as a Spring Bean. In project development, whatever classes you develop or whatever the classes you are writing, whatever the classes you are defining, like which are managed by the Spring container, they are called Spring Bean classes. Now, in Spring Bean class, whatever the variables you are creating, they are all called as dependencies. They are called as Spring Bean dependencies. I will tell you. Suppose inside the class, if you create any variables, we can call them as attributes. Otherwise, inside the class, whatever attributes you are creating, they are all called as Bean dependencies. Let me tell you what is happening. Suppose I'm defining a class like this. as part of my application development. Suppose I'm creating a class like this, public class name. Okay, it doesn't matter what, something. Suppose in my application I have to create a class called network manager. Some class I'm creating, doesn't matter what. This has, for example, string the network manager IP. Okay, example I'm taking. Right, okay. This is a network manager IP address. It's a class I'm creating. Network manager object has an IP address, and it also has a network adapter. Assume that it has a port number, say. Something I'm creating like this. Network adapter is one more class. If you look at this, okay, let's move on. Here something, doesn't matter what this. So just I want to tell you now, this I can call this as my, it is a Spring Bean class. Now I can call network manager object as a Spring Bean. Now I can call network manager object as a Spring Bean. Now again I'll tell you. Once again I'll tell you, this network manager object as a Spring Bean. Right. Now this network manager has IP address, port number, network adapter. Now I can call all these attributes. These are the attributes of network manager. The attributes are IP address, port, and network manager. These we can call as attributes, or in general words we call them as variables. If you define either setter getter methods, we call them as properties. Okay. I can tell you now, these are the network manager attributes. Okay, IP address, port, and network adapter. These are all called a network manager attributes. Right? These are all called network manager attributes. Right. We'll tell you 1 second. Now these are all called dependencies. These are all, we say, this network manager as a bean. Now this we call as a bean dependencies. Uh, Dependencies are nothing but all the variables are nothing but attributes that are created in a bean class. Now network manager object is a beans. We can call it as a Spring Bean. A Spring Bean is nothing but an object of a Spring Bean class. Now we can say, what are these Spring Bean dependencies? IP address is one dependency. These are all called attributes of the network manager object. Right. Now I can tell you what this IP address, this port, this network man adapter. What are all these? These are all called as bean dependencies. Means simply what dependencies are nothing but the attributes. Any variables you get. For example, if we create something like int x or int y, they are also called attributes, and we can simply call them as dependencies. So now bean dependencies are nothing but attributes. Attributes created in a bean class are called bean dependencies. If you take IP address, it's a string. I mean, this attribute can store a string value. This port can store a port number, integer. It is a value. Port is a value. This attribute IP address also stores value. But when you take network adapter, this is also one attribute, but this attribute stores an object of type network adapter. Means what? This attribute stores an object, but these two attributes are going to store values. Actually, string is class in java.lang package, but in Spring framework, it's going to be taken as, or it is going to be treated as a value simply. In Spring, string is treated as value type, not an object type. So IP address stores value. This port is another attribute which stores value. Network adapter is another attribute which stores an object. This network adapter stores an object. Now I can tell you. Okay, now I can tell you. Now this IP address, this port are the attributes which stores values. Now we say these are all called dependencies. These are the dependencies of network manager V. The dependencies are nothing but attributes. Right. IP address, port are called value types. This network adapter is the object type. Now these are value types and this is an object type. These are the value types and this is an object type. All right. Now I will tell you. Similarly, we can also have a collection type. Of course, here I'm not defining any collection type, but I can also define another what is called collection. That is called collection type dependency. So I can tell you now, a bean can have value type dependencies, object type dependencies, and collection type dependencies. As we know, value type dependencies are going to store value. Object type dependencies are going to store object, and a collection type dependency can store a collection. Now that is what the point you have to understand now. That is what the point I want to tell you. Okay, let's start with. Right. I won't tell you now. This a bean in Spring can have value type dependencies, object type dependencies, and collection type dependencies. Here I'm not defining any collection type here. So finally, these are the three types of dependencies that a bean can have. One is value type dependency, the other one is an object type dependency, and the next one is a collection type dependency. These are called the three types of bean dependencies. And in Spring, the IOC container, the Spring IOC container is going to inject the bean dependencies. Either it is a value type or an object type or a collection type. The Spring IOC container is going to inject the bean dependencies. Okay, now I just want to tell. Now I just want to tell you. The Spring IOC container injects bean dependencies through a type of dependency injection. Dependence injections are given. Right. Dependence injections are given are of 4 types. Dependence injections are given as 4 types. With the annotations, we have 5 types, but now we are not working with annotations. Here we are discussing about only 4 types. So Spring IOC container injects a bean dependencies through a type of dependence injection. And that is what actually we are going to discuss now. There are 4 types of dependence injections provided. I will tell you what. They are called types of dependence injections. They are called types of dependence injections. Like the one is a constructor injection. The other one, it is a sector injection. The third one, this is called interface injection. And fourth one, it is lookup method injection. Like this, dependence injections are given as 4 types: constructor injection, setter injection, interface injection, lookup method injection. Right? Okay. Constructor injection, setter injection, interface injection, lookup method injection are the 4 types of dependence injections what we have. So dependence injections are of 4 types. I will explain. We are going to start with the constructor injection. So dependencies are of 3 types. Dependence injections are of 4 types. The 3 types of dependencies of a bean are value types, object types, or collection types. Uh, the dependence injections are of 4 types. Okay, constructor based dependence injection, which is called constructor injection. Sector based dependence injection. Next, interface based dependence injection. Then lookup method dependence injection. Like that, there are 4 types of dependence injections are there in Spring. And in annotations, we have one more called field injection. We are going to discuss about that field injection in annotations. That's a new type of injection we have there. But when we start with annotations, at that time, I'll tell you about field injection. So in Spring IOC container is going to inject the bean dependencies. What happens in constructor based dependence injection? While creating an object, nothing but while creating a Spring bean, the Spring container or Spring IOC container is going to call is going to invoke parameterized constructor, okay, defined in the bean class, and I will inject the dependencies. That is called constructor. Means what? In constructor injection or constructor based dependence injection, now the Spring IOC container calls a parameterized constructor while creating a Spring bean, and injects the bean dependencies. That is called constructor based dependency injection. So we will understand how constructor based dependency injection is going to work. In setter injection, or we say setter based dependency injection, the Spring IOC container invokes a setter method after object creation is completed. Means once object is created, not while creating the object. It is not while creating the object. It is what after creating the object. After creating the object, means after creating a Spring Bean. Now the IOC container invokes a setter method and injects the dependency. That is called setter based dependency injection. Mostly the bean dependencies are injected through constructor based dependency injection or setter based dependency injection. Interface injection, lookup method injection, these two types of injections are used in very rare cases. Not, I mean, frequently. Interface based dependency injection, lookup method injection, both are going to be used in particularly some specific cases. Not commonly like constructor based injection, setter based dependency injection. So more frequently, the bean dependencies are injected through either constructor based dependency injection or through setter based dependency injection in any one of the two types. We will also find the variations, means when to go for constructor based injection, when to go for setter based injection, why both types of injections are provided will come in the next. But right now I just want to give you two things very clearly. Dependencies are three types, dependence injections are four types. That three types of dependencies are value types, second object types, and third collection types. They are the three types of the bean dependencies. But whereas dependence injections are four types. That is what the point first you have to understand. And there is a difference between dependency lookup and dependence injection. So in dependency lookup, a bean has to look for or search for its required dependencies in the container, and it has to get them explicitly. So the dependent object should have the code required for searching for its dependencies and getting them. But in dependency injection, the Spring IOC container or the container only injects the dependencies automatically. That's called dependency injection. That's a 1.8. Now we also want to know some more. I have to explain one by one. I'll explain to you next. But let me tell you. So now we'll go back to the point. I'll talk about how constructor injection, setter injections can be used. Constructor based dependence injection, setter based dependence injection, how to use them. We are actually going to discuss about them next. When it comes to Spring IOC container, when it comes to Spring IOC container, there are the Spring framework has provided two types of IOC containers. We are discussing about all the types now. Now types of Spring IOC containers. One is bean factory container, and the other one is application context container. One is bean factory container and the other one is application context container. So what's going to happen? I'll tell you. Actually, both are, I mean, these are the two types of the Spring IOC containers. In that bean factory is we call as a basic container, and application context is an advanced container, which I mean, actual application context and a bean factory are the two interfaces, and the application context is a sub interface of bean factory. Both are interfaces, and application context is sub interface of bean factory. Nothing but application context interface extends bean factory. Application context extends bean factory. So bean factory is a basic container and application context is an advanced container. That is the thing what I want to say. Application context is an advanced container bean factory. Actually, with a Spring, initially when Spring framework was given only for creating business layer, the Spring framework included bean factory container. But in Spring second version, that is Spring 2, then the Spring framework is expanded to the presentation layer and also to the data access layer. So application context container is provided with that. Application context container is a sub interface of bean factory. Comparatively, application context container has more features. It can provide more features to the application when compared with the bean factory. That's the reason why nowadays we use only application. I mean, almost all applications in Spring are going to use only application context container. Bean factory container is also there in current Spring framework API, but reason because application context extends bean factory. But we don't use directly bean factory container in nowadays in applications. We use application context. We'll find all the differences once you got some programming idea at the end of the Spring core module. As the last point of the core module, we'll discuss about bean factory and application context differences. So this bean factory is an interface, application context is another sub interface. For bean factory, now the Spring has provided implementation class XML bean factory. But and for application context means XML bean factory is an implementation class provided by Spring, the framework for bean factory interface. And for application context interface, the Spring framework has provided multiple implementation classes like class path XML application context. This is one implementation class. You have another like file system XML application context. And then we have some annotation config application context like that. These are the most used implementation classes. Now I can tell this XML bean factory is an implementation class of bean factory. Means what? XML bean factory is an implementation class of bean factory interface. And these three are the implementation classes of application context interface. Right. This XML bean factory is an implementation class of bean factory interface, and these three are the implementation classes of these three are the implementation classes of now this is an implementation class of bean factory interface. It is an implementation class. An implementation class of bean factory. Now these are the implementation classes of application context. Application context interface. And basically this container is responsible for creating objects, I mean injecting the dependencies of a bean, then initializing the objects and destroying the objects. These are the containers are going to take care of these responsibilities. But nowadays we don't use bean factory, but we use the application context. Now, in order to create objects, initialize, inject dependencies, and destroy the objects for all, to manage the life cycle otherwise. Now, the application name, information about the Spring Bean classes created by you in your application. And actually that information what required for the application which has metadata. So means what you need to tell some information about your bean classes to the application context, Spring container. The way how you can provide is through either in XML file, by writing that information in an XML file, or through annotations, by writing that information through annotations. So finally, what this application context container or even bean factory container, but we are not discussing about bean factory. We use application context only in every application of Spring. Totally all applications of Spring will use application context only. Application context is an advanced container. So I can tell you this application context container requires some information about beans. Now I will tell you the information you are going to provide. As a developer, you should define or you should provide or you should tell anything information about the Spring Bean classes you created in application. Information about your Spring classes to the application text container. Now that information you can provide to the application context by writing an XML file using annotation. You can add that information using annotations. So we can tell that configuration. This actually whatever information that you are providing to the application context, that is called as metadata. That is nothing but you are telling data about data. That is called metadata. Data is nothing but your class, and you are telling some information about your class to the Spring container. So we are calling it as data about data. You are writing some description about your classes, and you are telling that information, or you are providing that information to the Spring container. That is nothing but metadata. You are telling something about it. Data about data, which we call as metadata. Now what I am trying to tell, you can write that information in an XML file, or you can also write that information through annotations. So now you can tell the application that read that information, read that metadata or configuration metadata, because it requires that metadata in order to create objects, initialize them, inject the dependencies, destroy objects. To do all these things, this application context requires that configuration metadata. Now you can tell that, you can tell the application context to load that metadata or read that information, configuration metadata, either from XML file, or you can also tell that read that configuration metadata from annotations. The first two implementation classes to tell the application context that read the otherwise load anything, read the configuration metadata from XML files. The first two classes are used, and the last one, annotation config application context. This class is used to tell to read the metadata from the annotations, to read the configuration metadata from the annotations. I will tell you how the initially we are going to write some XML, but actually you no need to have XML, just only to in Spring the configuration file, which we are also called, we are going to call as Spring means configuration file, another word. We can write in this way to know that, and some tags also you will get. It is better to have knowledge of those tags also. But nowadays, as you know that we are not use XML, we are use annotations. Almost in every framework and in every technology, we are going to use annotations. We are going to use XML, we are going to use annotations, right? What of course I'm going to tell you about that. Okay, so three classes are there. You can understand. The first two classes are used to tell application context that read the configuration metadata of XML file. Configuration is generally a word we use. Configuration means just you are going to arrange the data or elements, anything in a specific order. When you write XML file, generally in XML file you are going to arrange the data in order, like with a parent tag, otherwise with a root tag, then parent tag, then child tag, like that. Okay, arranging the data in an order, particular order, that is called configuration. So when you created Spring Bean classes in the project, so now you are arranging the in some information about the Bean classes in an order. That is called the meaning of configuration. That's what we are calling as you are configuring a bean. You are configuring a bean means you are writing some information about the bean in an order. That is called configuration, bean configuration. Now I will tell you how that XML file you are going to write. Later on with annotations we continue, but initially we are going to use XML file. And whatever this knowledge what you are gaining in this session, this is purely based on what you are going to learn on Spring Boot. Means if you want to actually survive, or I mean if you want to work on Spring framework in real time projects, you should have the knowledge of Spring Boot microservices, about cloud, Spring Cloud. Then you also need to have some uh, DevOps tools, not all the tools but some tools like Dockers, Kubernetes, um, Jenkins pipelines, and a version control like a Git. This type of knowledge is required. So this is all will help you to work in the back end. And in the front end you have UI library like React JS, or you can use framework like Angular. But as of now, mostly when it comes to Java projects, people are using React JS library. Some applications are using Angular framework also. Especially when it comes to Java project development, in the front end, React JS library used mostly. So that is going to become you a full stack Java developer. Like you have a UI framework, you have a UI framework, or UI library in the front end. In the back end, you have the Spring Boot and microservices and cloud, and you have a database like one SQL based and one NoSQL based, either MongoDB or Cassandra. If you have the knowledge, then you are going to become a full stack Java developer. So whatever the classes here you are learning, this is basically the basic information I'm providing here in order to continue to learn the more things and the real-time things in Spring Boot and microservices class. So you all need to attend that session also announced, and in that session you this knowledge is going to be helpful to you there. There we are going to see application development in the real time using Spring. So now here, right now presently we are just getting only basic things, and here you got something like bean factor and application context. Initially we want to start writing with an XML file. Initially for 1-2 applications to get a practice on, okay, XML in Spring is going to look like this. The tags and attributes are going to be written in this format. So to have an idea. So initially we are going to start with XML only, then we go for annotations. Multiple applications initially I'll give you with an XML file, and moreover as a developer you don't need to have any knowledge on XML file. You don't need to have any knowledge on XML technology, right? It is just basic knowledge of XML is enough, and I'm going to provide you that. Once you got an idea of how to construct an XML file, a Spring Beans configuration file we call. XML files are called configuration files because in XML file we can arrange the data in a particular order. Because in XML we have tags like that, a root tag will be there, there is a parent tag, child tag, which are attributes. So we are going to write the information in order. That's the reason why this is called a configuration file. Configuration is a word used to say that arranging the elements in a particular form, in a particular format or in an order. That's what the meaning of a word called configuration. So XML files are always called as configuration files. You don't need to have any good knowledge of XML, just simple knowledge of XML. A basic knowledge of XML is enough. More knowledge of XML is not required. A simple knowledge of XML is sufficient enough. Right. So we will discuss about what basically the XML knowledge required here. Because initially we want to start with an XML. We want to define an XML file as a Spring Beans configuration file. Later on, we define the configuration using annotations. This application context container is going to read that the configuration metadata. That metadata means we are just writing that data information, or we are writing description about our class. That is nothing but data about data. So like comment also metadata only. Generally we are writing some comment. Comment is also a data, but that comment we are writing to describe our variable or a method or a class like that. So that comment is also called metadata. Like that you are writing some description about your Spring Bean classes in that XML file. That is called a metadata. So now here, uh, before writing an XML file, I will also tell you some basic rules is enough to know. Just I want to recap them. Suppose when you are writing any XML file, that XML file is going to have a root element. The meaning is what? One XML file has one and only one root element. One and only one root element. Right. Each element has a begin and end. Right. Each element has begin and end. And uh, element can have attributes, but attributes values must be in quotations. Attributes values must be in quotations, must be in quotes, either single quote or double quote. Just I'm writing some basic rules. This will help you in understanding XML file while writing. And one more thing is elements are case sensitive. Means uppercase letter in an element, writing uppercase letter and lowercase letter are not same. They are case sensitive elements. And you have something like uh, order. Parent element, child element is there. So parent element can be closed after closing child element only. Elements must be closed in an order. So after closing the parent element, then I cannot close its child element. So a parent element has to be closed or can be closed. After closing child element. Some basic rules that you are going to follow. Okay, multiple other rules are not required. Actually, on top of the XML file, sometimes you are finding a prologue which is called a processing instruction, which starts with question less than question mark XML version is equal to encoding is equal, like that. You are going to see one tag. I'm going to show you that. That is called processing instruction, which is called in shortcut PI. Okay, I'll write processing instruction is optional. You are going to see that at the time of writing. Like this, some basic rules, if you know, even though you don't have knowledge of XML, you have a nil knowledge, but don't worry, you can able to create the file in Spring. Like sometimes you might have observed when you're developing a web application using a technology like servlet or JSP, you are creating a web.xml file there. Still, even though you don't have any knowledge of XML file, you don't have a knowledge of XML technology. So here also same thing. Just if you know some basic rules, you can happily write this XML file. So for that separately, no need of learning any XML, because nowadays what happened, we have all annotations. Almost I can tell you XML is outdated. We have no more XML. Now we have everything today with annotations only, and it'll continue in further also with annotations only, no XML. So unnecessarily no need of learning XML again. It's almost outdated. Okay, it's completely, we have annotations which are replacing this XML. Okay, initially we got, we have alternate now. Instead of XML, we have alternate code annotations, and we are preferring to write all configurations through annotations only, not with XML. So no need to have any much knowledge of XML nowadays, right? So this is the point to understand. These are basic information required. Some rules, if you know, then writing XML file is going to be very much easy for you. A root element is one and only one. Like in web development, web.xml file is there, and it has a root element called web app, web-app. That is called root element. In under the root element only, we can write parent elements. Parent elements contain child elements like that. But the root element is a single. In one single XML file, we can't write two different root elements. Only one root element will be there for entire XML file. And element must contain begin and open, close, both required. Element can have attributes. Those values must be in quotes, either single quote or double quotes, irrespective of whether it is a date value or whether an integer value means a number or a string or a double. It doesn't matter in XML. Just everything is going to be string. Just keep it in single quotes or double quotes. And case sensitive elements are case sensitive. We can't write an element with one letter in capital and other letter in small. Elements are case sensitive. That element is given in capital, write in capital. If that element is given in lowercase, then write in lowercase. And a parent element can be closed after closing the child element. Before closing the child element only, parent cannot be closed. And on top of the first line of XML, mostly you are finding a processing instruction. But if you write that instruction or if you don't write that instruction, both are same. It is optional, no need of writing it. The first line is called processing instruction, which contains XML version and XML encoding type, UTF-8, something like that. We write. This is optional. These are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, some basic rules to follow. If you know them, then you can able to write the XML file very easily.